Hamburg, January 1943. A German munitions factory operating at maximum capacity, producing artillery shells for the Eastern Front. The night shift foreman, Werner Koch, made his routine inspection of the boiler room, the heart of the facility, where massive coal-fired boilers generated steam to power the entire operation. As he walked past the coal pile, something caught his eye: a dead rat. Not unusual, the factory had hundreds of them, drawn by warmth and food scraps. This one looked fresh, lying on its side near the coal bunker, probably poisoned by the facility's rat control program. Koch grabbed the shovel to toss the carcass into the furnace, standard procedure. The rat's body arced through the air and landed in the flames. Koch turned away, already thinking about the next inspection point. 12 seconds later, the boiler exploded. The blast tore through the boiler room with the force of 50 kilograms of TNT. Superheated steam and shrapnel killed Koch instantly and 4 other workers nearby. The explosion ruptured steam lines throughout the facility, causing cascading failures. Production stopped. The entire factory went dark. German investigators arrived at dawn, sifting through wreckage, searching for sabotage evidence. Bomb fragments? None. Timing devices? Nothing. Explosive residue in the coal supply? Negative. The explosion appeared to originate inside the boiler itself, but the boiler had been inspected and certified just 3 days earlier. Then, one investigator found something odd in the debris: fragments of what appeared to be animal remains, fur, small bones, organic matter that shouldn't survive a boiler explosion unless it had been inside something protective, something designed to withstand heat briefly before detonating. The realization hit like a second explosion. Someone had weaponized a dead rat. This wasn't an isolated incident. Across German-occupied Europe, factories were exploding, boilers were rupturing, and investigators were finding the same impossible evidence: dead rats that somehow caused industrial catastrophes. The British had created a weapon so devious, so perfectly camouflaged, that German workers were literally throwing bombs into their own furnaces without realizing it. This is the story of Operation Dead Rat and the explosive rodents that sabotaged the Reich from the inside. Let's rewind to 1941. The Special Operations Executive was in full operation, running sabotage campaigns across occupied Europe. They developed remarkable weapons: the well-rod pistol, disguised explosives, time-delayed devices. But they faced a persistent problem: getting explosives into heavily guarded German facilities. Factories, power plants, railway depots, fuel dumps. These were fortress-like installations with guards, checkpoints, searches, and patrols. Resistance members couldn't just walk in carrying bombs. Even small explosive devices hidden in briefcases or toolboxes risked discovery during security sweep. The Germans were paranoid and thorough. The SOE needed a delivery method so innocent, so utterly beyond suspicion, that German security wouldn't even recognize it as a threat. They needed something that could sit in a German facility for days or weeks, completely ignored, until it found its way into a boiler or furnace naturally. Enter Major Christopher Clayton Hutton, one of Station 12's most creative minds. Hutton was famous, or infamous, for unconventional thinking. He designed escape maps printed on silk handkerchiefs, hidden in playing cards and chess pieces. He'd created compasses disguised as buttons and collar studs. His philosophy was simple: hide the extraordinary inside the ordinary, the valuable inside the worthless. In late 1941, Hutton proposed an idea so bizarre that some colleagues thought he'd lost his mind: weaponize dead rats. The logic was actually brilliant. Every industrial facility in Europe had rats. They were everywhere: coal piles, storage areas, basements, anywhere food or warmth existed. Dead rats were even more common, killed by poison, traps, or disease. Workers disposed of them constantly, usually by the simplest method available: tossing them into furnaces or incinerators. What if those dead rats contained explosives? What if German workers, following standard disposal procedures, were actually arming and deploying British bombs without knowing it? The proposal was approved, and Station 12 began creating one of World War II's strangest weapons. Creating an explosive rat required solving multiple technical challenges. This wasn't just about hiding explosives inside a carcass. The weapon had to be convincing enough to fool workers who handled dead rats regularly, stable enough to survive transport and deployment, and reliable enough to detonate when disposed of in high heat. Station 12 started with real rat carcasses. They sourced dozens of dead rats, large ones, approximately 15 to 20 centimeters long, the size commonly found in industrial areas. The rats were skinned carefully, with the hide kept intact like a grotesque leather glove. Next came the explosive payload. Engineers hollowed out the rat carcasses and inserted approximately 85 to 100 grams of plastic explosive, typically composition C or similar material. This was enough to cause serious damage to a boiler or furnace, but not so much that the rat would weigh noticeably more than a normal carcass. But here's the critical innovation: the detonation mechanism. Station 12 couldn't use timer-based fuses. A dead rat might sit undiscovered for days or weeks before being disposed of. They couldn't use impact fuses. A rat tossed into a furnace needed to detonate from heat, not impact. The solution was a thermite-based heat-activated detonator. This small device, embedded in the explosive charge, remained inert at normal temperatures. But when exposed to the extreme heat of a furnace or boiler, temperatures exceeding 400 degrees Celsius, the thermite ignited, triggering the main explosive charge. The delay was typically 8 to 15 seconds after reaching activation temperature, long enough for a worker to throw the rat into the furnace and walk away, short enough that the rat wouldn't completely burn before detonating. The timing was carefully calculated to maximize both the explosive's effectiveness and the worker's chance of survival. Because the goal wasn't to kill workers, it was to destroy equipment. Once the explosive and detonator were in place, the rat's skin was carefully sewn back over the payload. Station 12 technicians became expert at this grotesque taxidermy, ensuring the stitching was tight enough to hold but not so obvious that it would attract attention. Some rats were coated with coal dust or dirt to enhance the appearance of having been found in an industrial setting. The final products looked disturbingly authentic. Matted fur, slightly stiff rigor mortis, the smell. Station 12 even replicated that, using chemical treatments that mimicked decomposition odors. In blind tests, German POWs shown the explosive rats couldn't distinguish them from genuine dead rodents. You won't believe how Station 12 tested these weapons to ensure they'd fool even experienced factory workers. Station 12 conducted extensive testing at their facilities in Hertfordshire. They recreated industrial environments, mock boiler rooms, furnaces, coal piles, and tested whether the explosive rats could survive realistic handling and deployment. The first tests revealed problems. Early prototypes detonated inconsistently. Some exploded too quickly, others failed to detonate at all. The thermite detonators were sensitive to ambient temperature. In cold environments, they required more heat to activate. In already warm rooms, they activated prematurely. Engineers refined the detonator chemistry, creating more stable formulations that activated reliably at specific temperatures regardless of ambient conditions. They also varied the explosive composition, finding the optimal balance between destructive power and concealment. Weight testing was critical. Station 12 weighed dozens of real dead rats to establish normal weight ranges, then ensured their explosive versions fell within those ranges. A rat that weighed twice as much as normal would arouse suspicion. They adjusted explosive quantities and used lighter detonator materials to keep weights realistic. Durability testing involves subjecting the rats to rough handling, being kicked, thrown, dropped from heights to ensure the explosive payload wouldn't detonate accidentally, and the outer skin wouldn't tear open and reveal the contents. The rats proved remarkably durable. Short of deliberately cutting one open, they maintained their disguise. The final test was psychological. Would someone actually dispose of these rats as intended? Station 12 brought in British factory workers, civilian employees who had no knowledge of the program, and placed explosive rats with inert training charges, not live explosives, in areas where they'd be discovered. In 19 out of 20 trials, workers disposed of the rats exactly as hoped, by tossing them into furnaces or incinerators without examination. The weapon worked. Now they had to get it into German hands. In early 1942, Station 12 produced approximately 100 explosive rats in the first production run. These were packed in innocuous containers, wooden crates marked as laboratory specimens or medical waste, and prepared for shipment to SOE networks in occupied France, Belgium, and Holland. But here's where Operation Dead Rat encountered its first and biggest problem. The Germans intercepted the shipment. In April 1942, a container of explosive rats bound for a French resistance cell was captured by German security forces during a routine checkpoint inspection. The exact circumstances remain unclear. Some sources suggest betrayal by a compromised agent, others indicate pure bad luck during a random search. German intelligence took the captured rats to their technical analysis facilities. Analysts quickly identified them as British sabotage weapons. They dissected several, documented the explosive payload and detonation mechanism, and issued urgent security bulletins throughout occupied territories warning of British Rottensprengstoff, British rat explosives. This should have been a catastrophic failure for Station 12. The weapon was compromised. The Germans knew about it. Game over, right? Wrong. Because what happened next turned a security disaster into a psychological victory. German security services distributed photographs and technical descriptions of the explosive rats to factories, power plants, railway facilities, and military installations across occupied Europe. The warnings were explicit. British agents were deploying weaponized dead rats. All suspicious rat carcasses should be reported immediately. No dead rats should be disposed of in furnaces without inspection. And this created chaos. Remember, industrial facilities in 1940s Europe had rats everywhere. Dead rats appeared constantly. Now, suddenly, every dead rat was a potential bomb. German security protocols required that each suspicious carcass be reported, collected, and examined by trained personnel before disposal. Do you know how many dead rats appear daily in a typical large factory? Dozens, sometimes hundreds in facilities with poor sanitation. Now imagine security officers having to inspect every single one, searching for subtle signs of British tampering. The workload was impossible. Security teams couldn't keep up. Factory operations slowed as workers waited for clearance to dispose of rat carcasses. Some facilities tried incinerating all rats in isolated furnaces specifically designated for that purpose, but this required building new incinerators and diverting resources from production. Other facilities implemented rat collection protocols. All dead rats went into special containers, transported off-site for examination and disposal. But this created sanitation problems. Piles of decomposing rat carcasses attracting disease and degrading working conditions. And here's the beautiful irony. There's no evidence that any explosive rat ever successfully destroyed a German facility. The captured shipment represented most or all of Station 12's production. But the psychological impact of the threat of explosive rats caused more disruption than actual explosive rats ever could have. German workers became paranoid about rodents. Production suffered. Resources were diverted. And all because Station 12 had created a weapon so plausible, so simple, that its mere existence forced the Germans to treat every dead rat as a potential bomb. Little did the Germans realize their overreaction to the threat was exactly what Churchill's ungentlemanly warfare aimed to achieve. Let's talk about what Operation Dead Rat actually accomplished. On paper, it looks like a complete failure. Weapon compromised before deployment, no confirmed successful detonations, operation canceled. But in reality, it achieved something far more valuable than a few destroyed boilers. It demonstrated the power of threat-based sabotage. Sometimes the fear of a weapon matters more than the weapon itself. By creating a plausible, simple, terrifying sabotage method, Station 12 forced the Germans to waste enormous resources countering a threat that barely existed. Conservative estimates suggest German security forces across occupied Europe spent hundreds of thousands of man-hours dealing with rat-related security procedures. Factory production was disrupted. Security personnel were diverted from other counter-espionage work. Morale suffered as workers dealt with decomposing rat collection systems. And the psychological impact rippled outward. If the British could weaponize dead rats, what else had they weaponized? Suddenly, every innocuous object in a German facility became suspect. That piece of coal? That scrap of wood? That dead bird? Station 12 had opened a door in the German imagination, and paranoia flooded through. German intelligence reports from 1942 to 43 document investigations into potentially weaponized everyday objects. Suspicious pieces of metal found near railways, odd-looking rocks near fuel depots, dead birds near airfields. Most of these were nothing, just debris and natural animal deaths. But German security couldn't ignore them because the explosive rats proved that British ingenuity could turn anything into a weapon. The operation also succeeded in another way. It validated Station 12's philosophy of psychological warfare through clever deception. This approach influenced subsequent operations, including the fake coal campaign that actually did succeed in destroying German locomotives and boilers. The Germans took the rat threat seriously enough to develop formal countermeasures. Security manuals distributed to facility commanders included sections on identifying suspicious animal carcasses. Key indicators included unusual weight for size, possibly indicating internal explosives. But this was difficult to assess without handling numerous real dead rats for comparison, which few security personnel wanted to do. Visible stitching or seams in the hide, indicating the carcass had been opened and resealed. But real rats often had wounds from traps or fights that could look similar. Unnatural positioning or stiffness, suggesting internal foreign objects. But rigor mortis created natural stiffness, making this criterion nearly useless. The manuals also recommended using long poles or tools to handle suspicious rats, maintaining distance in case of explosion. Some facilities issued special protective gear to security personnel tasked with rat examination, which must have been one of the least desirable duty assignments in the entire Wehrmacht. Certain high-security facilities implemented total rat eradication programs, using extensive poison campaigns and physical traps to eliminate rodent populations entirely. This worked in some locations but was unsustainable in larger industrial complexes where rats had unlimited hiding places and food sources. Interestingly, the German response revealed a blind spot in their thinking. They focused entirely on dead rats in industrial settings, never considering that the same principle could apply to other animals or objects. Station 12's subsequent fake coal campaign succeeded partly because German security was still fixated on rat threats and didn't imagine the British would weaponize coal itself. Beyond its tactical impact, the explosive rat became a propaganda tool for both sides. British intelligence services deliberately leaked information about the operation, including exaggerated claims about successful deployments to underground resistance newspapers in occupied territories. These publications ran stories about British rat bombs destroying German factories, always carefully ambiguous about whether the stories were true or aspirational. The goal wasn't accuracy, it was morale. Resistance members and occupied civilians loved the idea that dead rats could fight the Nazis. It was subversive, clever, and darkly humorous, exactly the kind of story that gave hope to people living under occupation. The stories also served a recruitment function. If Britain could imagine weapons this creative, this audacious, maybe the SOE was worth joining. Maybe there was a way to fight back that didn't require armies and tanks. Maybe ordinary people with clever ideas could make a difference. The Germans, meanwhile, used the explosive rats in their own propaganda, but it backfired. Nazi propaganda portrayed the rats as evidence of British desperation and ungentlemanly warfare, claiming that only a losing nation would resort to such cowardly tactics. But this messaging inadvertently admitted that these tactics were effective, which undermines German claims of invincibility. Some German propaganda posters actually warned civilians about explosive rats, showing cartoonish images of rats with bombs inside them. These posters were intended to demonstrate British treachery, but instead spread awareness of British sabotage capabilities, adding to the general paranoia that the SOE wanted to create. The explosive rat concept inspired variations and successor operations. Station 12 explored weaponizing other dead animals, birds for targeting fuel depots where dead birds were common, fish for sabotaging port facilities, even cats for residential areas where cat carcasses might be disposed of in home furnaces. None of these variants progressed beyond experimental stages. The explosive rat's capture and compromise made Station 12 cautious about deploying similar animal-based weapons. Instead, they shifted focus to inanimate objects, the fake coal operation being the most successful example. But the principle remained valid. Identify something enemies handle routinely without suspicion, weaponize it, and let their standard procedures deliver the weapon to the target. This philosophy influenced numerous SOE operations throughout the war. There are unconfirmed reports, never fully declassified, that a small number of explosive rats from the original production run were successfully deployed in France and Belgium through different smuggling routes after the initial shipment was captured. Some accounts describe boiler explosions in German facilities in late 1942 that investigators couldn't explain, with witnesses reporting dead rats in coal piles shortly before the incidents. These accounts are impossible to verify. Station 12's records on the explosive rat operation were largely destroyed after the war, either deliberately or through routine document disposal. What survived is fragmentary. A few technical specifications, some photographs, scattered mentions in personnel files and after-action reports. What we know for certain is that the explosive rat terrified the Germans enough to change their security procedures across occupied Europe. And sometimes, terror is its own form of success. Operation Dead Rat remained classified for decades after the war. When details finally emerged in declassified documents during the 1970s and 80s, historians were divided on how to assess it. Some viewed it as a comical failure, an overly clever weapon that never worked as intended. Others recognized it as a successful psychological operation that achieved strategic impact without successful tactical deployment. Today, examples of Station 12's explosive rats exist in only a few locations. The Imperial War Museum in London displays one in a special exhibition on SOE weapons. It sits in a glass case looking remarkably unremarkable, just a stuffed rat with a small plaque explaining its deadly nature. Visitors often walk past without noticing. The Churchill War Rooms Museum also holds explosive rat specimens, displayed alongside other SOE sabotage devices. Museum guides report that the rats consistently generate visitor fascination. Something about the combination of mundane animal and hidden explosive captures imaginations. The operation influenced Cold War-era sabotage thinking. Both CIA and KGB technical services explored similar concepts, weaponizing ordinary objects to create deniable sabotage devices. While specific operations remain classified, the principle of disguising weapons as worthless objects became standard tradecraft. Modern IED, improvised explosive device, used by insurgent and terrorist groups worldwide, owe intellectual debt to Station 12's innovations. The concept of hiding explosives inside innocuous objects, dead animals, trash, roadside debris, traces directly back to World War II British ingenuity. But unlike modern IEDs, which are designed to kill indiscriminately, the explosive rat was designed with specific tactical purpose: destroy equipment, disrupt production, create paranoia, but minimize human casualties. The delayed detonation gave workers time to move away. The targeting focused on industrial facilities rather than personnel. This distinction matters. Station 12 wasn't creating terrorist weapons. They were creating precision sabotage tools for unconventional warfare against a military-industrial target set. The explosive rat never became the weapon Station 12 envisioned. It never destroyed dozens of German factories. It never caused the industrial chaos its designers hoped for. On paper, Operation Dead Rat was a failure. Compromised before successful deployment, known to the enemy, canceled before achieving its tactical objectives. But wars aren't won on paper. They're won in the minds of soldiers and security personnel, in the allocation of resources, in the thousand small inefficiencies that accumulate into strategic disadvantage. And by that measure, the explosive rat succeeded brilliantly. It forced the Germans to treat every dead rat as a potential bomb. It diverted security resources from legitimate threats. It created paranoia that spread beyond rat carcasses to every aspect of German industrial security. It demonstrated that British creativity and ingenuity could weaponize literally anything. And that demonstration changed how the Germans thought about security. The explosive rat was absurd. It was grotesque. It was so creative that it seemed like something from a cartoon rather than real military planning. But that absurdity was its strength. Because it showed the Germans and showed resistance members across occupied Europe that there were no rules, no limits, no boundaries to how Britain would fight this war. Churchill had ordered the SOE to set Europe ablaze using ungentlemanly warfare. Station 12 took that mandate and ran with it, creating weapons that weren't just effective, they were imaginative, audacious, and occasionally insane. The explosive rat embodied that philosophy perfectly. It was a weapon that shouldn't have worked, deployed in an operation that failed, yet somehow achieved strategic impact through the sheer creativity of its design. So the next time you see a dead rat, in an alley, in a basement, in any industrial space, remember, in 1942, the British tried to turn that common sight into a weapon of war. They didn't quite succeed, but they made the Germans afraid of rodents. And in the end, making your enemy afraid of rats, that's its own kind of victory. From exploding rats to silent rifles to fake coal bombs, Station 12's creativity knew no bounds. But Britain's strangest weapons are far from over. Stay tuned to WW2 Weapons, where we uncover the secret arsenal that helped win the war. Subscribe now. The next weapon might be hiding in plain sight.